The night is dark and echoing of vampires.
Volterra, Italy, November 2006. The throne room smelled of stone and old blood, and the specific mineral cold of a space that had not admitted direct sunlight in 500 years. Bella Swan had been inside it for approximately 40 seconds, and had already made her decision. The three thrones were arranged on a raised platform at the room's far end, and the men who occupied them had the quality of things that had been in this specific room for so long that the room had organized itself around their presence, rather than the other way around. The one in the center, pale, dark-haired, with the warm and absolute attention of someone who had not encountered a single surprise in the last several decades and was currently encountering something adjacent to one, was Arrow. She knew his name. She knew all their names. She had read everything available about the Volturi across the weeks after Edward left, which was not something she had done out of obsession or grief or any of the emotions she was supposed to have been feeling. She had done it the way she did most things when she was trying to understand a situation, systematically, without sentimentality, filing the information in the categories it belonged in. Arrow, Marcus, Caius, the guard ranged along the walls in their dark cloaks, still as decorative columns. Felix and Dimitri flanked the entrance. Jane stood to Arrow's right on the platform with the particular quality of someone whose function was to be feared, and who was currently performing that function for a room that contained two humans and a vampire who did not yet understand the full scope of what he had walked into. Edward was talking. He had been talking since before they entered, the rapid, desperate quality of someone who had prepared a speech they believed was necessary, and was delivering it because the delivery felt like action in the absence of any other available action. She could hear the specific quality of his voice, the control required to keep the devastation out of the surface of it, the way it kept almost breaking and being retrieved. She looked at Arrow. Arrow looked at her. "Mr. Cullen," Arrow said, pleasantly, without looking at Edward, "I wonder if we might allow your companion to speak." Edward stopped. She stepped forward, not from behind him, around him, which required Edward to sidestep or be walked into, and he sidestepped. And she was in front of him before he had finished understanding the geometry of what she had done. "He wasn't going to tell you anything useful," she said. The throne room was very quiet. "I can see that," Arrow said, with the warmth of someone who had found a thing they had not been expecting to find and was taking the time to properly appreciate it. He leaned forward slightly. "You are Isabella Swan." "Bella," she said. "Bella," he repeated. "You are calmer than most people who stand in this room for the first time." "I've been thinking about this room for a while," she said. "Have you?" he said. "Since New Moon," she said. "Since I understood the Volturi were real and what you governed and how the system worked." She held his attention without the effort it usually took to hold someone's attention. Arrow's gaze had the quality of something that was simply already there, already receiving, already filing. "I've been running the relevant calculations since I got on the plane in Seattle." "And what," Arrow said, "did the calculation produce?" "A transaction," she said. To her right, Caius made a sound that was not quite words and was not quite nothing. The specific sound of someone who had already made a decision and was waiting for the courtesy of the other parties catching up to it. "She's human," Caius said. "She has seen this room." "The law, yes, Caius," Arrow said, with the patient quality of someone managing a colleague who was technically correct and temperamentally premature. "Let her speak." "Here are the terms I'm proposing," Bella said. She did not look at Edward. She was aware of him behind her, could feel the specific quality of his attention on the back of her head, the way she had always been able to feel when he was paying the kind of attention that contained something much larger than attention. She filed this the way she had been filing everything useful about this room since she walked into it. "Edward leaves," she said. "Tonight he walks out of this building and out of Volterra, and the Volturi don't pursue him. Not now, not in 10 years, not as leverage against the Cullen family. He is outside this transaction completely. Off the board, permanently, and in exchange," Arrow said. "Me," she said. Permanently, willingly, she paused. "I understand what that means. I'm not naive about what I'm offering." Arrow looked at her for a long moment. He descended from the platform. He moved the way very old things moved when they were not bothering to perform their movement for an audience, with the complete, unhurried certainty of something that had absolute confidence in its own arrival at any given destination. He crossed the throne room floor and he extended his hand, palm up, the gesture of someone who was offering rather than demanding. She put her hand in his. The contact lasted perhaps 4 seconds. She felt it, not the reading itself, which was not something she could perceive from the inside, but the quality of his attention changing as the reading occurred, the way a person's face changed when they found the answer to something they had been working on. The warmth in his expression increased. He released her hand. "Remarkable," he said. "I'm aware," she said. "You weren't afraid," he said. "In this room, in this specific moment, with this specific offer. You weren't afraid." "No," she said. "That's very interesting," he said. "Most of the people who come to this room with an offer are afraid of the room. You came with an offer because you'd already assessed the room and decided it was a viable negotiating space." He looked at her with the full, collected attention of someone who was filing every available piece of information. "You think like a Volturi." "I think like myself," she said. "Yes," he said. "Exactly," Caius said, Arrow. "She's right that I'm going to agree to the terms," Arrow said, still looking at Bella. "Edward Cullen is valuable primarily as a demonstration, and we have made the demonstration we needed to make simply by having him in this room. The girl is a rarer thing." He turned to Caius with the pleasant, absolute quality of someone who was not arguing because there was no argument. "She is offering willingness." "Do you know how seldom we receive willingness?" Caius looked at Bella with the expression he appeared to have for most things, which was the expression of someone who had a preferred outcome and was calculating the distance between the preferred outcome and the one he was being given. The law requires that she not leave this room human and aware," Arrow said. "She is not proposing to leave this room human and aware. She is proposing the opposite." He looked at her. "The terms are accepted." "Bella," Edward's voice. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had known how to read for the better part of a year, and was reading now clearly, at full resolution, without the blurring that had characterized her reading of it across most of their relationship. The expression was not just love, it was the specific, devastating quality of someone who had organized every calculation of their existence around a single variable and was watching the variable make a decision that excluded them. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said. "Bella, this is what I'm choosing," she said. She heard the quality of the sentence as she said it, and understood why it was the thing that was going to stay with her longest. Not the throne room or Arrow's hand or the specific smell of old blood and stone. The sentence, "This is what I'm choosing," said in a voice that was completely unambiguously her own. "This is my decision," she said. "Made by me. You don't get to undo it, and you don't get to make it into something you did or didn't do." She held his eyes. "You need to go." "I can't, Felix," Arrow said, pleasantly. Felix was behind Edward before Edward had registered the movement. The specific physical certainty of someone who had done this before and understood that the requirement was removal rather than conversation. Dimitri materialized on his other side. Edward said her name. He said it with the specific quality of someone using the word as a last viable resource. Not a call, not a question, not an accusation. Something between all three. She looked at him. She did not reach for him. She did not cry. She watched Felix and Dimitri move him toward the throne room's secondary exit, the one that led to a corridor she had not seen, and she watched Edward looking at her over his shoulder with the expression she had fully read and was now filing in the category of things she understood and was done with. And the throne room was very large, and she was at its center, and the doors at the far end were still open, but not for much longer, and his voice was still saying her name, diminishing with the distance until the distance was complete and the door closed. The throne room doors. Closing, her heartbeat in the new silence, the last human heartbeat she was ever going to hear from the inside. She turned back to Arrow. "What happens now?" she said. "Volterra, Italy. The castle." That night, Arrow bit her himself. This was the first distinction. The specific status-communicating choice of a 3,000-year-old man who had not personally overseen a transformation in long enough that the guard's institutional memory had made it mythological rather than documented. He brought her to a room that was not the throne room and was not a cell, which was the second distinction. The room had a window. The window faced east. She had noted both things. He explained, in the precise, warm way he explained everything, what the next 3 days would contain. He was thorough without being unkind. the thoroughness of someone who had made this offer before and had learned that the quality of the information delivered beforehand was the difference between a transformation that produced something useful and one that produced something that needed to be managed. She listened. "You understand," he said, when he had finished. "Yes," she said. "Most people are afraid," he said. "Most people arrive here differently than I did," she said. He looked at her with the expression he had been developing since the throne room, the specific quality of someone for whom finding a thing that matched an imagined category exactly was rarer than finding a thing that exceeded or failed the category, and who was, for the first time in some time, in the matching situation. He bit her. The pain was not what she had expected, which was useful information about what she had expected. She had expected pain in the mode of something external, something the body received and processed and eventually discharged. What arrived instead was pain in the mode of something internal, something that was coming from the inside of the body's own chemistry, from every cell simultaneously receiving the same urgent, burning signal. He laid her on the bed. He said, 3 days. She did not respond, because the burning had arrived at the level where response required resources she no longer had available. The 3 days. She would not describe them to anyone. Later, because the description would require choosing what was essential, and she had found that essentially all of it was essential, and therefore the description was the 3 days themselves, which no description could substitute for. What was happening was this. She was being unmade and remade at the cellular level by a substance that had no interest in what she preferred to remain. The venom moved through her bloodstream like a fire that knew where it was going and was not in a hurry. Because venom was not in a hurry, venom had infinite patience for the work it was designed to do. She felt it reach her heart on the second day, and the sensation of her heart receiving the venom was not the sensation of something being killed, but of something being changed, the specific quality of an engine being rebuilt while it was still running. She did not scream. This was a choice. Not a successful suppression of the scream, a choice made on the first day. That she was going to receive this transformation as something she had agreed to rather than something being done to her, and that the distinction was going to be held through whatever came, including the things that made the holding very difficult. She held it. She thought, in the intervals between the burning's peaks, about the calculations she had made on the plane. She had not been lying to Arrow. She had run the numbers on a yellow legal pad at 30,000 feet with Alice's address book open to the Volturi's section, which she had photographed from Alice's desk the previous week. The numbers had been simple. Edward was going to walk into Volterra and ask to die. She was going to go to Volterra instead. The Volturi would receive one of them regardless. The question was which one and on what terms. The terms she had negotiated were the terms she had wanted. She spent the third day in a state that was not quite sleep, and was not quite consciousness, a state the venom produced on its own timeline rather than hers, a state that was not comfortable but was not the burning, which felt, in the context of the second day's peak, like a significant improvement. She opened her eyes. The room was the same room, and the window was facing east, and the sun was rising over Volterra in the specific way that ancient Italian cities caught the early light, the stone becoming something other than stone for the duration of the catching, and she could see every individual stone's texture at a resolution that the human eye she had previously operated with had not provided. She was on her feet before she had decided to be on her feet. She was at the window before she had decided to be at the window. She looked at the city below, and the city below arrived at her in layers, the visual first, every surface and shadow present at full resolution, then the sound, the city waking, the layers of it separable and individually legible, and underneath both, the smell. The smell. Human blood at street level, 70 feet below, was the most immediate information she had ever received in her life. More immediate than the burning, more immediate than the negotiation, more immediate than the last thing Edward had said to her, which she was still carrying in her memory with the complete fidelity that her new memory had for everything. She turned from the window. Arrow was in the doorway. "Good morning," he said. She said, "I need to feed." He brought her a man. The man was brought to the room by 2 of the guard and was left there, a middle-aged man in tourist clothes who smelled of sunscreen and beer and the specific human warmth of someone who had not understood, walking into whatever they had been told was a wine cellar or a historical site or whatever the current method was, what the room he was in was for. He looked at Bella. She looked at him. This was the moment Arrow had described, not in explicit terms, but in the specific, careful way he had described the transformation's aftermath. The part where the new vampire encountered the first available blood source, and the question was not whether they would feed, but what kind of person they would be while they did it. He had not told her it would be a choice. She had assumed it would be one. She thought about Carlyle, who had starved himself in a cave rather than feed on a human, and had arrived eventually at the animal diet, and had used it to maintain what he called his humanity across 3 centuries. She thought about the yellow legal pad. She thought about the throne room. She crossed the room. The man made a sound, brief and terminal, and she registered it, and registered that she was registering it, and registered that the registering was not producing the response she had expected the registering to produce, and she understood, in the specific, clear way she understood things now, that this was what Arrow had been describing when he had used the word adjustment. She fed. When she was done, she stood in the center of the room, and she felt the specific quality of satiation that she had no human equivalent for. Not the satisfaction of a meal, not the pleasure of something enjoyed, but the deep, absolute quieting of something that had been operating at its maximum volume since she opened her eyes and was now at a sustainable level. She looked at her hands. She thought, I am not afraid of what I just did. She filed this, in the specific way she was going to file everything from now on, at the resolution she had going forward. The cloak they brought her was standard issue. The same dark fabric and the same cut as the guards, sized approximately correctly, produced efficiently by whoever produced the Volturi's clothing. She held it in her hands for a moment. I'd like it tailored, she said. Differently, the cut is wrong for what I need to be able to do in it. The guard member who had brought it looked at her. She held his gaze with the red eyes she had been wearing for approximately 3 hours. I'll arrange it, he said. She handed the cloak back. Thank you, she said. She turned to the east-facing window and looked at the city of Volterra below, and the city arrived at her at full resolution, and the sun was fully up and doing what it was going to do to the streets and the stone all day, and she watched it with the absolute, unimpeded attention of something that had no competing input to attend to. She was not waiting. She was planning. Forks, Washington, the Cullen house. May 2009. Alice saw the first one in a vision on a Tuesday. She described it to Carlyle the way she described visions that had the quality of warning rather than information, with the specific, compressed precision of someone who understood that the value of the vision was in the details, and that the details needed to arrive in a form that could be acted on rather than processed. A girl, she said. 19, maybe 20. Red eyes. She doesn't know where she is. She's in a parking structure in Capitol Hill, and she's very new, and she has no idea what she's doing. Carlyle looked at her. Victoria, he said. I can't see Victoria directly, Alice said. But the geography and the timing? She paused. Yes, by the end of May there were 7 confirmed sightings. The Seattle papers were calling it a crime wave, which was the category available to human journalists working with human evidence. The bodies, the blood, the specific quality of deaths that did not fit the standard profiles of human violence because they had not been produced by human violence. The police were running task forces. The FBI had sent people. None of it mattered. None of it was designed for the actual problem. Alice tracked the visions with the focused, continuous attention of someone who was watching a situation develop that was going to require a response and was trying to determine the shape of the required response before the situation forced the determination. She tracked them on paper, which was the method she used when the volume of futures was too high for the mental filing she usually relied on. A map of the Seattle metropolitan area with incident markers, dated, with the specific qualities of the vision she had recorded alongside. By June, the map had 19 markers. Edward looked at it. He had been looking at things in the house with the specific quality of attention he had been bringing to everything for 3 years, which was the quality of someone for whom looking at things was an activity conducted in the absence of the thing he actually wanted to look at. He had not, in 3 years, developed any visible relationship with this absence that could be described as acceptance. He had developed a functional relationship with it, the performance of continued existence, that the family had learned not to examine too closely because the examination produced information that none of them had a useful response to. He looked at Alice's map. Victoria is building an army, he said. Yes, Alice said. Why? He said. Because she wants the Cullens, Alice said. Or she wants Bella. Or she stopped. She blames us. She blames you specifically. She's been building this for 3 years, and she's been patient about it, and the patience is, she looked at the map, The patience is ending. Carlyle called a family meeting on a Wednesday in July. The family assembled in the main room with the specific, weighted quality of people who had been waiting for the meeting to be called and were not surprised it was being called now. Esme sat beside Carlyle. Emmett and Rosalie were on the east side of the room. Jasper stood near the window with the quality he had when he was managing the room's emotional weather and had identified that the management was going to require sustained attention. Alice presented the information. The number of confirmed newborns had reached 23. The Seattle area's exposure risk was approaching the threshold that the Volturi's secrecy law required action on. Not approaching it the way a human approached a speed limit, where the approach was gradual and the limit was a specific marker, but approaching it the way a situation approached inevitability, where the threshold was a description of a state that had already partially arrived. "We can't fight 23 newborns," Emmett said. "Not safely," Jasper said. "Not with this family's numbers. A coordinated assault against newborns at those numbers requires," he paused, "more than we have. And any engagement that doesn't resolve quickly creates exactly the kind of exposure the secrecy law prohibits. So, we wait," Rosalie said, "until Victoria commits the army to an actual attack and we respond to it, by which point the exposure is already beyond the threshold," Carlyle said. The room was quiet. Edward had not spoken. He was at the room's edge with the specific quality he occupied rooms with, which was the quality of someone who was present as a function of being in the room rather than as a function of choosing to be in the room. He was looking at the window. "The Volturi," Jasper said. Carlyle closed his eyes briefly. "Yes," he said. The Volturi were the option that had been on the table since the first week of June, and that Carlyle had been not naming with the practiced deliberateness of someone who understood that the naming of an option was the first step toward its selection, and who was not ready to select it. He was ready to select it now. The secrecy law was the Volturi's most fundamental mandate. A newborn army of 23 in a major American city was a violation of that law at a scale that the Volturi were not going to allow to continue regardless of whether the Cullens requested assistance. The question was not whether the Volturi became involved. The question was whether they became involved at the Cullens' request. With the Cullens as cooperative parties rather than incidental ones, or at their own initiative, with the Cullens as parties who had known about the situation and had not reported it. The second option had consequences that the first did not. "The request is formal," Carlyle said. "It goes through the standard channel. We present it as a secrecy law violation requiring Volturi enforcement and request assistance." He opened his eyes. "Which is accurate. And they send someone," Emmett said. "Yes," Carlyle said. "Who?" Emmett said. Carlyle looked at Alice. Alice had the slightly displaced attention of someone who was looking at a vision that was not fully resolved. "I can't see the specific individual," she said. "The futures around Volturi personnel have always been, the shield effect extends. Whoever they send, their presence is, I can't resolve a face." Edward said, "What have you heard from Tanya?" He said it without looking away from the window. "About what?" Carlyle said, carefully. "About Volterra," Edward said. "About who's been elevated. There have been rumors for 2 years. I've heard the edges of them from Alice's visions, and I've heard Emmett and Rosalie discussing them. And I've heard you and Esme," he stopped. "I've heard the edges. What have you heard from Tanya specifically?" The room held what Edward had just said with the specific, loaded quality of something that had been in the room for a long time and had finally been named. Carlyle said, "The rumors from Denali are that Arrow has taken a proc. Someone elevated above the standard guard hierarchy. External mission command. We don't know who." "Tanya doesn't know who," Emmett said. "Tanya's information is second-hand," Carlyle said. Edward turned from the window. He looked at his family with the expression that his face had learned to produce in the years since Volterra. Not the devastation that had been visible in the first months, which the family had had to manage with the specific, sustained care of people who were watching someone very close to an edge and could not force them back from it. Not that. Something that had organized itself around the devastation rather than replacing it. The way a body organized itself around an injury that was not healing. "I see," he said. He went upstairs. Carlyle sent the request to Volterra on a Thursday morning. He sent it through the formal channel, the contact address that Arrow had provided at the end of the Volterra incident 3 years ago. The incident that had not resolved the way any of them had expected it to resolve. He wrote the request in the specific, precise language of the formal channel. which was a language he had developed across decades of interaction with the Volturi, and which communicated the relevant information without the emotional content that the relevant information was surrounded by. Secrecy law violation. Seattle metropolitan area. Estimated 23 to 25 newborn vampires. Creator, Victoria, nomadic. No coven affiliation. Requesting Volturi enforcement assistance. He did not add anything. He sent it. The response came 48 hours later. It came in the same channel, a brief acknowledgement in the formal register that communicated what acknowledgements in the formal register communicated, received, processed, action forthcoming. It specified a date approximately 2 weeks out. It specified a meeting location, a forest clearing north of Forks that the sender had identified from the request's coordinates, with the specific, geographical knowledge of someone who had access to extremely comprehensive mapping. It did not name who was coming. Carlyle read the response twice. He sent the family the relevant information. In his office, sitting at the desk where he had composed the request the previous morning, he held the response for a long moment and thought about what was in it and what was not in it, and what the absence of a name might mean, and whether the absence was the specific deliberate quality of something withheld or the general quality of something that simply had not been included. He thought about Edward. He thought about Volterra. He put the response in the file. He went downstairs. Forks, Washington, the forest clearing. June 2009. They arrived at dusk. This was the specific hour the response had specified, not morning, not the neutral ambiguity of midday, but dusk, which was the hour that communicated something about the Volturi's relationship with human observers and with the general principle of operating in conditions that did not require management of the sunlight variable. The forest north of Forks was old growth, and the old growth at dusk had the specific quality of light that was not quite gone, the quality of a transition being made by degrees, and the clearing sat in it with the stillness of a space that had been chosen rather than arrived at. The Cullens had been in the clearing for 40 minutes. Carlyle had positioned the family in the specific, thoughtful way he positioned the family in formal encounters with other supernatural parties, not defensively, which communicated fear, and not casually, which communicated disrespect, but in the configuration of people who were present and organized and understood the weight of the occasion. Esme was to his left, Emmett and Rosalie behind, Alice and Jasper on the right flank. Edward was at the clearing's edge. He had been at the clearing's edge since they arrived, which was the position he had chosen and which no one had argued with, because the position communicated what everyone understood about his relationship to this specific meeting, which was that his presence was the minimum available and he was providing it. He was looking at the tree line. They heard them first. Not the sound of approach. The Volturi guard did not produce the sounds of approach in the way that things approaching through forest usually did. The specific sound of footfall and displaced vegetation and the ambient disturbance of bodies moving through a space. They did not produce those sounds because the speed at which they moved and the specific practiced quality of their movement did not admit them. What the Cullens heard first was the change in the quality of the forest's existing sounds, the birds going quiet at a specific perimeter, the small, specific silence that radiated outward from the approach of something that the forest's animals had categorized correctly and had responded to accordingly. Then they were at the tree line. 5 of them. The specific composition of the party had been a question the family had been running since Carlyle received the response, and the composition told them things. 5 was large for an enforcement mission of this scale. The Seattle situation was significant but not unprecedented, and the Volturi's standard enforcement deployment was 2 or 3 guard members for situations of this complexity. 5 communicated something beyond enforcement. Jane was among them. Carlyle registered her first, the small figure, the pale face, the specific quality of her presence that was not physically imposing but had the architectural quality of something around which other things organized themselves. Alec was beside her, which was standard. They were almost always deployed together. The offensive-defensive pairing of gifts that made them the Volturi's most effective tactical unit. Felix was behind them, Dimitri at the flank. The 5th was in front. The 5th was the one the formation organized around, the specific geometry of a group of people arranged in relation to their command rather than in tactical formation. The cloak was the standard Volturi black, but the cut was not standard. Carlyle registered this in the first second, the specific non-standardness of it, the way it had been constructed for movement rather than ceremony. The hood was up. They crossed the clearing's tree line and stopped at 15 feet. Cullen, said the figure at the formation's center. The voice arrived in the clearing with the specific quality of something that had been calibrated. Not loud, not a performance of authority, but the voice of someone who understood that the room accommodated the speaker rather than the other way around, and who had internalized this without it becoming something they performed. "We received your request," the voice said. "We've assessed the Seattle situation. We're prepared to address it." A pause. "We have some additional business in this territory." Carlyle said, "We appreciate the response." He stopped. The figure had raised both hands to the hood. Carlyle stopped speaking. Not because the gesture interrupted him. He had been speaking at the pace of someone who had prepared what they were going to say, and was delivering it, and the gesture had arrived in the interval between two sentences. He stopped, because in the interval before the hood came down, something in the specific quality of the voice, the register of it, the particular way it had produced the word territory, had landed in a part of his processing that was not the part he was using for the prepared speech. He was very still. The hood came down. The face was not the face he had known. This was the first and immediate quality of it, not that it was unrecognizable, but that the recognition arrived through the specific. Necessary recalibration of encountering someone you knew at a different resolution. 3 years had not changed what he would have called her features. But features were not the thing that had changed. The thing that had changed was the quality behind them. The specific quality of someone who had arrived at a place inside themselves and was fully resident there. Without the ambivalence or the negotiation that had always been the background register of the person he remembered. Her eyes were red. He had known they would be, the human diet, the 3 years. But the knowing of it and the receiving of it at this distance in this clearing were different kinds of knowing, and the receiving required a moment. "Carlyle," she said. He said, "Bella." Esme made a sound. It was brief and involuntary, and was the sound of someone for whom the encounter had arrived at a level that bypassed the prepared responses. The sound of someone for whom the person in front of them had been a person they loved rather than a supernatural party they were formally receiving. Bella looked at her. Something in the red eyes received the sound without producing a visible response to it. Alice was to Carlyle's right, and Alice had the specific displaced quality she had when visions were arriving rather than being retrieved, not the deliberate vision state, the involuntary one, the quality of someone who was receiving information that was being generated by the current scene rather than information being requested. Her eyes were slightly unfocused. "I couldn't see you," Alice said. "For 3 years. There were shapes, in the Volturi visions, someone at the center of them. I couldn't resolve a face." "I know," Bella said. "The shield." "Your shield blocks my visions," Alice said. "The decisions that originate inside the shield produce outcomes that your gift can't trace back to their source," Bella said. "Yes," Alice looked at her. She looked at her with the specific quality of someone who had loved a person for a long time and was now receiving a version of that person that required significant adjustment to the catalog of what the person was. Not the adjustment of encountering someone changed in the ordinary ways, the ways of years and experience, but the adjustment of encountering someone who had been rebuilt from a different set of materials. "Bella," Alice said. "Alice," Bella said. Emmett had not spoken. Rosalie was looking at the formation, at Jane, who was to Bella's right with the flat, pale attention she brought to rooms she was not the most important person in, at Alec, at Felix and Dimitri. Rosalie was running the tactical read that she ran in situations with the supernatural composition she was assessing, and the tactical read had a quality to it that was different from the usual quality. Jasper was the one Carlyle watched most carefully. Jasper's gift was receiving the room, and Jasper was receiving the room with the focused, continuous attention of someone who was managing something significant. His face had the specific, managed quality of someone who was holding the emotional content of the clearing at a specific distance from their own processing, which was the gift in its most active mode, not passive reception, but active management. The clearing had a great deal to manage. Edward had not moved from the clearing's edge. He had been at the edge when they arrived, and he was at the edge now, and the edge was what his position had communicated since they entered the clearing, the minimum available presence. Provided, he had been looking at the tree line since the figures emerged from it. He had been looking at the formation. He had been looking at the figure at its center. He had been doing what he did with information that arrived at a scale he needed to process. He had been holding it at the distance of the clearing's width, at the specific distance between the edge where he stood and the center where the formation had stopped, which was approximately 15 feet, which was not very far. He looked at the face. He looked at the red eyes. He looked at the specific, calibrated quality of someone who was fully resident in where they were and what they were, without the ambivalence that had been the background register of every version of her face he had carried in his memory for 3 years. He looked at Bella Swan. The clearing held its dusk quality around them. Bella looked at the family assembled in the specific, organized configuration Carlyle always used for formal encounters. And the family looked at her, and the looking had the quality of something that had been building for 3 years across 2 continents, and had arrived at this clearing and was not going to be managed into a smaller thing than it was by anyone's preference for a smaller thing. She let the looking happen. She had anticipated this, had run the encounter in the specific way she ran every external mission, which was to anticipate the variables and the likely behavior of each party, and to have already decided, before arriving, what her responses to each were going to be. The family was a set of known variables. She had spent a year in close proximity to each of them. She knew their registers and their response patterns and the specific individual ways they processed difficult information. She had run the encounter. What she had not fully accounted for, in the running of it, was the quality of Jasper's face. He was at the right flank, which was his standard position, and he was managing the clearing's emotional content with the active. Continuous effort that his gift in its most demanding mode required, and the quality of his face told her something about what the clearing's emotional content was that her own assessment of the variables had not fully resolved. She noted it. She moved on. "The Seattle situation is the primary business," she said to Carlyle. "We'll address it in the next 48 hours. I'll need whatever intelligence you've compiled on the newborn army's movements and Victoria's last confirmed location." "Of course," Carlyle said, with the quality of someone who was managing several things simultaneously and was choosing, with deliberate effort, which one to address first. "The specific numbers Alice reported in your request have changed," she said. "Our intelligence puts the current count at 27, possibly 28. 3 have moved south of Seattle into the Tacoma area, which creates a secondary exposure risk that we'll need to address separately." "We weren't aware of the southern movement," Carlyle said. "I know," she said. "Our network in the region has different source coverage than what's available from your position in Forks." She looked at Alec, who was to her right. "Alec can walk you through the tactical approach we've planned for the primary clearing. I'll need your family's participation at the perimeter. Not engagement. Perimeter. The guard is handling the primary force." "Understood," Carlyle said. "The secondary business," she said, "is the Quileute Treaty Line. We'll address it after Seattle. There's a question of jurisdictional clarity that the Seattle situation makes necessary to resolve while we're in the region." "The pack," Carlyle said. "Yes," she said. Edward had not moved. She was aware of his position with the specific, peripheral quality of awareness that her new existence afforded her. The complete spatial picture of every person in the clearing, their positions and their physiological states, and the specific quality of each one's stillness or movement. She had this awareness the way she had all awareness now, which was without the hierarchy her human attention had imposed on information, without the organizing tendency to put some things in the foreground and some things in the background based on emotional significance. He was at the clearing's edge. He had not moved since the hood came down. She had processed this and had filed it in the category it belonged in, which was the category of things she had anticipated and was not going to alter her operational behavior in response to. She continued addressing Carlyle. "The timeline for the Seattle operation is 48 hours from now," she said. "I'll need the intelligence compiled by tonight. Alice's visions of the newborn movements are the most valuable piece of tactical information available to us. I'd like her working directly with Dimitri on the tracking coordination." Alice was looking at her with the quality she had worn since the hood came down, which was the quality of someone running 2 processes simultaneously. The present encounter and the internal adjustment required by the present encounter, and not finding the 2 processes entirely compatible. "Yes," Alice said. "I can do that." "Good," Bella said. "Bella," Carlyle said. The quality of his voice on her name was the specific quality she had been expecting. The voice of someone who had prepared for the formal encounter and was encountering the limits of the preparation. The place where the prepared version of the encounter ended and the actual encounter required something the preparation had not provided for. She looked at him. "Are you?" he started. "I'm here on Volturi business," she said, not unkindly. "We can address the other questions after Seattle. Tonight I need the intelligence." She held his eyes with the specific direct quality that was not coldness. Coldness was a withholding, a temperature managed down from something warmer. This was different. This was simply the quality of someone for whom the encounter was what it was, rather than what it had been 3 years ago, or what anyone in the clearing might have preferred it to be. Carlyle held her gaze for a moment. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she said. He moved. She did not see the movement. This was the specific quality of Edward's gift, deployed at the speed that his grief had been building toward for 3 years. The speed of something that had been at rest for a very long time, and had found the specific moment when the rest was no longer the governing condition. He was across the clearing before the family had finished registering that he had left the edge. He was in front of her. Felix moved. She raised her hand, a fraction, a minimal gesture, and Felix stopped. Edward was 3 feet away. He looked at her with the expression she had anticipated and had not been able to fully prepare for, which was the distinction between knowing a fact and encountering the fact at the resolution of reality. The anticipation had been correct in its elements: the devastation, the 3 years, the specific quality of someone for whom the absence had become the thing their existence organized around. She had anticipated all of this correctly. What she had not anticipated was the quality of the looking. It was not accusation. It was not the righteous version of his grief, the version that would have made the looking something she could engage with operationally. It was the looking of someone who had been waiting for the specific quality of her face, not the red eyes, not the cloak, not the Volturi formation, but the face underneath those things, which was the face he had been carrying in his memory for 3 years and which he was now encountering at reality's resolution and finding that it was still there. She held the looking. She gave him 3 seconds of it. "Bella," he said. His voice had not lost the quality she remembered, which was the specific, layered quality of a voice that was doing multiple things simultaneously, the surface of it controlled and the thing underneath visible in the control it required. He said her name the way he had said it in the throne room, which was as a last available resource. She said, "Edward." His name, in her voice, which was her voice. The voice that had been rebuilt by 3 years, and the transformation, and the Volterra stone, and the Italian and everything else, but was still, recognizably, hers. He did not say anything else for a moment. His legs were not entirely managing the situation. She watched him register this, the specific involuntary quality of someone whose body was receiving information that their mind had not finished processing. The physical fact of her presence at reality's resolution arriving in his nervous system at a different rate than it was arriving in his cognition. He stayed upright. She watched him stay upright with the specific effort of someone for whom staying upright was, at this moment, the full extent of the available resources. "I need to get the intelligence compiled," she said. He looked at her. "We'll begin the operational briefing at the house in 2 hours," she said. "I'll need you present. Your gift is useful for the coordination with Dmitri." She held his eyes. "That's all," she said. She turned back to Carlyle. Behind her, she heard the specific, barely perceptible sound of Edward finding the thing he needed to stay where he was. Not acceptance, not resolution, not any of the things that people arrived at through time and distance and the ordinary processes of loss. Something smaller and more immediate, the next 2 hours. The thing that was available. She heard him find it. She did not turn around. "Carlyle," she said. "The intelligence, Seattle, Washington, the industrial district." June 2009. She had chosen the ground 3 days before the engagement. This was the principle Arrow had articulated in the 2nd year, in one of the tribunal sessions where the case under review had been a territorial dispute that had escalated past the point of diplomacy and into the kind of confrontation that produced bodies and exposure risk, and the specific, cascading problems that followed both. He had said, "The ground is always a choice. And the choice of ground is always the first tactical decision, and whoever makes it has already won a portion of the engagement before anything has happened." She had walked the industrial district on a Wednesday evening, alone, in the specific way she walked spaces she was assessing, which was at the speed that allowed her to receive all available information rather than the speed that prioritized covering the distance. The warehouses, the sightlines, the approaches from the north and east, and the specific bottleneck that the railway infrastructure created at the district's southern edge. She had built the plan on a Thursday. She had briefed the guard on Friday. The newborns came from the north. They came with a specific undisciplined quality that Jasper had described to the Cullens across the previous week's operational briefings, not as a tactical force, not as something that had been organized around a strategy, but as 27 individual sets of newborn instincts that had been pointed in a direction and released. They were fast, and they were strong, and they had the specific, overwhelming confidence of things that had never encountered anything stronger than themselves. She was on the elevated position she had chosen, the rail yard's central control structure, 12 feet above the district floor, which gave her the sightlines she needed and the distance from the primary engagement that her role required. She had the shield fully extended. This was the thing she had built across 3 years of deliberate practice. Not the passive shield of the throne room, the thing that simply existed as a quality of her mind and blocked external access to it, but the active, projected shield that Breaking Dawn had confirmed was theoretically possible, and which she had made actually possible through 3 years of the specific. Sustained effort of someone who understood the shield as a capability rather than a trait. It covered the guard, all of them, Felix, Dimitri, Alec, the 6 additional guard members she had brought for the Seattle operation, and the Cullen family positioned at the perimeter. The shield ran in a dome over the engagement space, and it ran at the cost of the specific. Continuous attention it always cost, the thing that could not be set and forgotten but had to be held. She held it. "Eastern cluster," she said. Dimitri moved. He moved with the complete, efficient commitment of someone who had been following orders for centuries and had learned, across those centuries, to parse the minimum necessary information from an instruction and execute from it without requiring elaboration. He had the Eastern clusters lead 3 newborns out of the primary formation before they had finished registering that the formation had a flank. "Felix, center left," she said. Felix moved. The center-left cluster had the specific forward-committed quality of newborns that had identified the largest nearby body of supernatural presence and were moving toward it on instinct. The instinct that had been correct every time they had used it in the 6 weeks of their existence and was not correct now, because the largest nearby body of supernatural presence was Felix, and Felix was not what they were prepared for. "Alec," she said. "I can't project through the shield," Alec said. He was below her, at the structure's base, which was the position she had assigned him and which he had occupied with the specific, professional non-argument of someone who understood that the position assignment was correct even if it neutralized his primary gift. "I know," she said. "Hold the southern line." She did not need Alec's gift. The shield was doing what Alec's gift would have done, creating the specific. Controlled environment in which the newborn's raw strength was the only variable they had available, and raw strength at 27 against the guard's training and tactical coordination was not the advantage it felt like from the inside of it. This was the thing newborns never understood. They were stronger than the vampires they were fighting. They were faster. They had the specific, overwhelming physical advantage of the first year of their existence, the human blood still saturating their muscle tissue, every biological system operating at its maximum capacity. They had all of this. They had never been in an organized engagement. The guard had been in thousands. "North flank is separating," Dimitri said. She looked north. 3 newborns had broken from the primary cluster and were moving on a vector that would take them wide of the main engagement. Not tactical, not a flanking maneuver in the organized sense, but the instinctive behavior of individual newborns who had encountered opposition and were running the basic survival calculation of finding an easier target. The easier target they had identified was the Cullen perimeter. "Emmett," she said, into the communication that the engagement had established, which was the specific low-register communication of people who had been briefed together and were operating from the same tactical picture. 3, coming to your position. Wide approach from the north." A pause. "We see them," Emmett said. She heard the perimeter engage. She returned to the primary engagement. Victoria was not with the newborns. She had not expected Victoria to be with the newborns. The specific quality of Victoria's intelligence, her gift, the self-preservation instinct that had kept her alive and free for 3 years of the Cullen family actively hunting her, was not the intelligence of someone who led from the front of a military engagement. Victoria led from wherever the engagement was not, and directed from that position, and moved when the directing required moving. She was watching the engagement from the eastern tree line. Bella had been tracking her since they arrived, with the peripheral quality of awareness that allowed her to hold the tactical picture of the primary engagement and the position of the one variable in the district that was not a newborn. Victoria was fast. Victoria had been running for 3 years and had built the specific, maintained capability of something that had been in motion continuously and had not allowed itself to stop. She was moving, not at the engagement, away from it. The self-preservation instinct processing the engagement's current state and arriving, correctly, at the conclusion that the state was not the one Victoria had planned for when she built the army. "Dmitri," Bella said. "I see her," he said. She watched Dmitri break from the primary engagement. The tracking gift was the specific capability that made the Volturi's guard what it was, the ability to locate any target anywhere in the world from a mental signature, the ability to maintain that location regardless of movement or distance. Victoria had been running for 3 years. Dmitri had been tracking people for considerably longer. He crossed the district in the specific committed way of someone who had identified a trajectory and was resolving it. Victoria was fast. She was not fast enough. The engagement took 11 seconds. Bella did not watch it. She was managing the primary engagement, which was at the stage where the initial tactical advantage had resolved into the specific. Grim work of containing what remained of 27 newborns against an organized force, and the containing required the full quality of her attention on the shield's maintenance. She heard when it was over. Not Victoria's voice. Victoria would not have given her a voice. She heard the specific quality of the silence that arrived when a variable was removed from the tactical picture, the way a sound registered by its absence more clearly than its presence. Administrative, she had written it in the briefing notes on Thursday. Victoria's elimination is an administrative task that will follow from the engagement's primary resolution, not a dramatic objective to be pursued at the expense of tactical coherence. She had written it, and she had meant it, and she had been correct. The engagement concluded at 43 minutes. Not a clean number. She had run the projection at 35 to 40, and the additional 8 minutes were the specific, accurate cost of the northern cluster's separation, requiring the Cullen perimeter's engagement, which had introduced variables that the projection had not fully accounted for. She filed the gap between projection and outcome for the debrief. She lowered the shield. The release of the continuous attention that the shield required was the specific quality of setting down something heavy. Not pain, not relief in the dramatic sense, but the physical fact of a sustained effort reaching its conclusion and the body running the accounting of what the effort had cost. She sat on the structure's rail and she ran the accounting. 23 of the 27 newborns had been eliminated by the guard in the primary engagement, 3 at the Cullen perimeter. 1 had broken southeast and been tracked by Dmitri after Victoria. She added a note to the debrief agenda. Victoria, the Seattle secrecy violation was resolved. The engagement had not produced secondary exposure beyond the pre-existing violation. The district's industrial geography had contained it. She looked at the district below, the warehouses, the sightlines, the bottleneck at the southern edge that had done exactly what she had planned it to do. The ground she had chosen on Wednesday evening at the speed that allowed her to receive all available information. Carlisle was at the structure's base. He had come from the perimeter when the engagement concluded, which was the specific, orderly behavior of someone who had been briefed on the tactical sequence and was following it. She looked down at him. "The treaty line," she said. "Tomorrow morning." "Yes," he said. "I'll need you there," she said, "not to intervene, to be present." He looked at her. "Bella," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight," the debrief. She came down from the structure. The district was quiet. The engagement was complete. The treaty line was a road. This was the physical fact of it, a 2-lane road through the Olympic Peninsula's specific committed green. Marked on neither side by anything official, the boundary existing in the knowledge of the people it governed rather than in the infrastructure of the place itself. She had driven across it dozens of times as a human, in both directions, without the crossing registering as anything more than the ordinary passage from one piece of geography to another. She stood at it now from the fork side. The guard was behind her, not at the line, 20 yards back, which was the position she had placed them before walking to the line alone. Carlisle was among them, which was the arrangement she had specified and which he had accepted with the specific, deliberate quality of someone who understood that accepting it was the correct choice, even if the acceptance required something from him. She had been at the line for 4 minutes. She had heard the pack assembling in the tree line on the reservation side for the last 3 of them. Jacob Black came out of the trees first. He came in human form, which was the choice that communicated something about the nature of the meeting he had decided to have. Phased, he would have had the pack's collective processing. The shared information and the shared emotional content. The specific quality of a collective consciousness that was both more and less than the sum of its parts. Human, he was Jacob Black, which was the thing he had decided to be for this. He was larger than she remembered. The years and the phasing had done what they did to the wolves. The specific, physical consequence of regular transformation. The body maintaining a state adjacent to the transformation's peak, rather than returning fully to the human baseline between phases. He moved with the quality she had always read in him, which was the quality of someone for whom the body was a primary instrument rather than a secondary one. The forward energy of someone who thought best, while in motion. He stopped at the tree line. He looked at her. She held the treaty line and she held his gaze, and she let him look at what he was looking at, which was the specific inventory of what 3 years had produced. The red eyes, the cloak, the specific quality of stillness that was hers rather than the pack's quality. The stillness of something that had found its operational register and was occupying it fully. He was not moving. She had anticipated many versions of this moment across the 48 hours since the clearing. She had anticipated the anger, which was the version of Jacob's response most consistent with his established character. The specific, hot-temperature anger of someone for whom the present situation was an affront to a picture of the world they had believed in. She had anticipated the grief, which was the version that sat underneath the anger in Jacob, the way it sat underneath the anger in most people who were feeling it, the thing the anger organized around. She had anticipated versions. She had not fully anticipated the specific quality of his face, which was the quality of someone who had been running a version of events in their head for 3 years and had arrived at the reality of the version and was finding that reality was not the thing the version had been. He had known, she understood, not the details. Not the throne room, or the transformation, or the tailored cloak, or the 3 years of Volterra, but the quality of having known, from the moment Sam's pack had started catching the edge of Volturi scent on the wind the previous day, that the thing they were catching the edge of contained something specific to him rather than something general. He had known, and he had come anyway. She gave him the moment. Then she said, "Jacob." He crossed to the treaty line. He crossed in the specific, committed way of someone who had decided to close the distance and was closing it, and he stopped at 4 feet, which was the distance that was inside the ordinary social geometry and outside the combat geometry, the distance that was a statement about what kind of encounter this was going to be. "Bella," he said. Her name in his voice had a quality she remembered, not the quality of Edward's voice on her name, which had been the last available resource. Jacob's voice on her name had always had the quality of something that was entirely certain of what it was saying, the certainty of someone for whom the name was not a call or a question but a fact they were stating, because stating it was the most important thing available. She held his gaze. "When?" he said. 3 years ago, she said. "Volterra." He absorbed this. "You were in Volterra 3 years ago," he said, "and you've been—" "Yes," she said. His jaw moved. "He left," Jacob said. "Edward left. You went to Italy because he left. I went to Italy because I chose to go to Italy," she said. "The reasons are a more complicated accounting than that. He left, and you—" He stopped. He was doing the thing she had watched him do as a human. The thing that was Jacob's specific version of processing difficult information, which was the version that moved through several emotional states in rapid sequence without settling in any of them, because the settling would have required accepting the information as final, and he was not ready for the information to be final. "It was 3 years ago," she said. "It's now," he said. "You're here now, in a Volturi cloak with a Volturi guard 20 yards behind you at the treaty line." He looked at her eyes. "You're one of them." "I am them," she said. His face. She held it with the specific, receiving quality she had been building since Volterra. Not indifference, which was the absence of processing, but the quality of someone who was fully receiving the information and was not going to produce the response the information might have produced in a different version of her. She received his face, and she processed it, and she did not produce the response. "Sam said there are questions about the treaty line," Jacob said. "Volturi jurisdiction. What you people consider your authority to be in Quileute territory." "Yes," she said. "That's the secondary business I mentioned to Carlyle." "Business," he said. "Jacob," she said. "The treaty is between the Quileute pack and the Cullen coven. It specifies conditions that the Cullens agreed to in exchange for the pack's cooperation with the secrecy that both parties benefit from." She held his eyes. It does not specify conditions that govern Volturi operations in this region. The Volturi are the law that all vampire activity operates under, including the Cullen Coven. The treaty's authority is derivative of the Volturi's authority, not independent of it. You're saying the treaty doesn't apply to you, he said. I'm saying the treaty applies to the Cullens, she said. I'm Volturi. The Volturi's jurisdiction is not subject to local treaty arrangements. He was very still. That's, he started. The legal position, she said. It's not a negotiating opening. It's a statement of how the authority hierarchy functions, which has always been how it functions. You simply haven't had occasion to encounter the hierarchy's upper register until now. His hands were at his sides. She read the quality of them, the specific, physical quality of Jacob's hands when he was managing the thing that phasing into a wolf would have expressed, and he was not phasing into a wolf because he had come out of the trees in human form, and that decision was still governing. So you can just walk across the line, he said, anytime, because you're Volturi. I can cross the treaty line when Volturi business requires it, she said. The treaty line is a Cullen Quillet boundary. I'm neither. But I'm also not interested in crossing it without reason, because the Pack's cooperation with the secrecy mandate is something the Volturi value, and unnecessary conflict with the Pack is not consistent with maintaining that cooperation. That's very generous of you, he said. She looked at him. Jacob, she said. I know what you want to say. I know what you came to the treaty line to say. I've been watching you not say it for 4 minutes. She held his eyes with the full, complete quality of her attention. Say it. He looked at her. The anger was there, it was present, the hot temperature version she had anticipated. But it was not the thing that was loudest. The thing that was loudest was underneath it, the thing the anger was organized around, which was the specific quality of a person who had held a version of events in their head for 3 years and had just had the version replaced by the reality. You were going to come back, he said. That's what I told myself. Whatever happened in Italy, whatever the Cullens said or didn't say, you were going to come back. Bella Swan was going to come back to Forks at some point, because he stopped. That's what Bella Swan did. She said nothing. But you're not, he said. No, she said. He looked at the road. He looked at the tree line behind her. He looked at the guard 20 yards back, at the specific organized quality of them, the dark cloaks and the stillness, and the hierarchy that was visible in how they were positioned around where she had been standing. He looked at her. The treaty line, he said. You said you're not crossing it without reason. That's correct, she said. Then we're done here, he said. She said yes. He held her gaze for one more moment. She held it back. He turned. He walked to the tree line and he went into it, and the trees received him the way the trees received everything that belonged on that side of the line, completely, without ambiguity, without the specific, negotiated quality of a boundary that was still being worked out. He was gone. She stood at the treaty line. Behind her the guard was in the positions she had placed them, and the morning was doing what mornings in the Olympic Peninsula did, which was continue in the gray, committed way of weather that had made up its mind and was not interested in revisiting the decision. She had anticipated the encounter. She had anticipated Jacob backing down. She had not anticipated the specific quality of the backing down, which was not the backing down of someone who had been outmaneuvered or intimidated, or who had run a calculation and found the calculation did not favor engagement. It was the backing down of someone who had arrived at a line and had found that the thing on the other side of it was not the thing they had been waiting 3 years for it to be. She filed this in the category it belonged in. She turned back toward the guard. We're done here, she said. The clearing north of Forks had the quality of aftermath. Not dramatic aftermath. Not the quality of a space that had been the site of something significant and was broadcasting that significance. The quiet, administrative aftermath of something that had been planned and had concluded on schedule. The specific quality of ground after an engagement that went as intended. The guard had dispersed to their assigned positions for the night's administrative work. The documentation that Volturi enforcement required. The specific records that went back to Volterra as the formal accounting of an external mission's completion. She was in the clearing alone. She had been in it for 20 minutes, running the debrief in the specific, internal way she had developed for completing the tactical accounting before the formal written version, the way of going through the engagement sequence and identifying the gap between what was planned and what occurred, and filing the gap as information for the next operation. She heard him coming from the tree line. Edward came into the clearing the way he had come across it in the previous day's encounter, with the committed quality of someone who had made a decision and was executing it, but different from the previous day's version in the specific way that a decision made after 24 hours of processing was different from a decision made in the immediate response to an encounter. He had been thinking about this. She knew this from the quality of the approach before she turned around, and she turned around because not turning around would have been a kind of performance, and she was not interested in performing anything. He was 20 feet away. He stopped at 20 feet. He had the quality he had had at the clearing's edge the previous day, the organized devastation. The 3 years of it visible in the specific way that 3 years became visible in a person who had spent them in a particular mode, the mode of someone who had made an error and had been inside the error ever since. She looked at him. He said, "I came to say something." "All right," she said. He held her gaze with the full, gathered quality of someone who had prepared for this and was aware that the preparation was not going to be the thing that mattered and was using it anyway. "I left," he said, "in September, 3 years ago. I went into the forest with you and I told you I didn't want you and I walked away." He held her eyes. "I told myself it was protection. I had been telling myself a version of that since the first day in the biology classroom, that my proximity to you was the danger, that the Cullen family was the danger, that you would be safer if we weren't in your life." She said nothing. "I was wrong," he said. "Not in the way I was wrong about small things. I was wrong in the fundamental way. The way that recontextualizes everything that preceded the error. I was not protecting you. I was protecting myself from the specific fear of what I was capable of, and I dressed the fear in language about your safety so I could make the decision and live inside it." He paused. "You got on a plane to Volterra because I had removed every available alternative." "That's not accurate," she said. He looked at her. "I got on a plane to Volterra because I ran the calculation, and the calculation produced a specific outcome and I went to execute the outcome," she said. "You were a variable in the calculation. You were not the calculation." "Bella, I'm not diminishing what you did," she said. "I'm correcting an inaccurate account of causality. You left. The leaving produced consequences. One of the consequences was the calculation. The calculation was mine." She held his eyes. "The distinction matters." He was quiet. "You want me to tell you it was your fault," she said. "Not because you want absolution, you want the fault to be yours, because it would mean the thing that followed from your fault was something you could have prevented. You could have been different, and I would be different, and the calculus of all of it would have produced a different outcome." She looked at him with the full, receiving quality she had been building for 3 years. "That's not how it works. You're telling me I'm not responsible," he said. "I'm telling you you're not the center," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at the clearing. He looked at the ground between them. He had the quality she had anticipated in the planning, the quality of someone doing all the emotional work in an encounter where the other party was not doing any, and the asymmetry was arriving in his experience as something he was managing rather than something he could address. She watched him manage it. "What I want to say," he said, "is that I'm sorry. Not for the reason you just described, not the causal argument, for what I am to you. For what I've always been, which is the person who required you to manage around me, who required you to run calculations that accounted for my—" He stopped. "My inadequacy to the situation," she said, "Edward." He looked at her. "You didn't make me a dark queen," she said. "Esther didn't make Elena a vampire by building the apparatus around her. The apparatus was built. The person either is adequate to the apparatus, or they aren't." She held his gaze. "The calculation I ran on the plane was the most honest accounting of the situation I had ever run, and the honest accounting produced the throne room and the negotiation and what followed from it. And what followed from it is what I am." She paused. "The apology is unnecessary. Not because you didn't do what you did. Because the thing you're apologizing for was the door, and the door opened into something I walked through." He was looking at her with the expression she had seen in the clearing the previous day, the looking that had surprised her. The inventory not of what she had become, but of what was still there underneath what she had become. "I see you," he said. "In there. I hear your thoughts in my gift, Bella. I've been hearing them since the clearing yesterday. You're right that I'm not reading you. The shield is." He stopped. "But I can hear the quality of the absence, the shape of where you are." He looked at her. "You're still there." She said nothing. "I'm not saying it as an argument," he said. "I'm not going to tell you that you made the wrong choice, or that there's a version of this I could offer you that's better than what you have. I know what Volterra is. I know what arrow is. He held her eyes. I'm saying it because you told me once that honesty was something you required from me, and I wasn't always adequate to that requirement, and I'm trying to be adequate to it now. He paused. You're still there. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment with the full, receiving quality of her attention applied to the specific information he had just given her, which was the information she had not been anticipating because she had run the encounter's variables and had not included this variable, which was the variable of his gift finding the shape of the absence. She extended the shield, not the full projection, not the dome of the engagement or the coverage of the guard, a specific contained projection. The smallest available expression of what the shield could do when it was being used with precision rather than scale. She extended it toward him, and the extension arrived in the space between them as the specific, physical quality of something pressing against a person in the way that air could press when the air was not ordinary. He took a step back. Not dramatically, the small involuntary step of someone who has encountered a physical boundary they did not see and whose body has registered the boundary before their mind finished identifying it. He looked at the space between them. He looked at her. She held the projection for 3 seconds. Then she withdrew it. The space between them was the space between them again. 20 feet of clearing, the dusk quality of the light, the specific quality of two people who had stood in rooms and forests together for years and were standing in a clearing in the aftermath of the last time they were going to do it. "Goodbye, Edward," she said. He looked at her. The expression on his face had the quality that things had when they arrived at their final form, not resolved. Not the organized piece of something that had been worked through to a conclusion, but final in the way that facts were final, the quality of a thing that had reached the end of the question of what it was going to be. He said, "Goodbye." He turned. He walked to the tree line. She watched him go with the specific, complete attention she gave to things she was seeing for the last time and had decided to see fully rather than partially, to give the full quality of the new resolution to rather than the managed version. He went into the trees. The clearing was empty. She stood in it. She ran the remaining accounting from the engagement's debrief. The numbers. The gap between projection and outcome. The note about the southeastern newborn for the formal report. Then she walked to the tree line on the opposite side and went to find the guard. The drive out of Forks took 11 minutes. She had timed this in the planning, which was the specific habit she had built across 3 years of external operations. The timing of exits was the thing that distinguished clean departures from departures that left loose ends, and loose ends were the category of things she had organized her operational practice around not producing. 11 minutes from the clearing to the highway. She did not look at the town. Not as a statement. Not the performed quality of someone who was refusing to look at something as a way of communicating their relationship to it. She did not look at it because there was nothing in it that required her looking at this moment, and she had been operating for 3 years on the principle that attention was a resource, and that directing it at things that did not require it was the specific inefficiency she was most interested in eliminating. She looked at the highway. The guards' vehicles were ahead of her and behind her, the specific formation of an organized convoy rather than a collection of cars moving in the same direction, and she was at its center in the position that her role required. She looked at the highway, and she did not look back. The flight from Seattle to Rome was 11 hours. She used 8 of them for the formal report, the written accounting that Volturi enforcement required, the specific document that would go into the archive that had been accumulating the records of external missions since before the printing press had existed to make the keeping of records easier. The archive was not digital. She had proposed digitization in the 2nd year, and Arrow had received the proposal with the warm, genuine interest he brought to ideas that engaged him, and had tabled it with the specific, final quality of decisions that were not going to become undecided, which was his polite method for communicating that the answer was no, but that the question had been well considered. She had not raised it again. She wrote the report in Italian, which was the language of the formal record, and had been the language of the formal record since the institution's founding. The report covered the Seattle engagement, the jurisdictional clarification at the Quileute Treaty Line, the elimination of Victoria, the newborn army's disposition, and the Cullen family's participation at the perimeter. She wrote it with the specific, precise language of the formal record. No interpretation, no editorial, only the accounting of what occurred and when and with what outcome. She used the remaining 3 hours to draft the follow-up correspondence. The drive from Rome to Volterra was the specific, familiar quality of a return. Not nostalgia, Nostalgia was the quality of longing for a place you had been and had left and were distant from, and she had been in Volterra for 3 years and had left for 11 days and was returning, which was a different category of relationship with a place. The stone towers at the city's edge caught the afternoon light in the specific way she had memorized across 3 years of looking at them from this approach. The warm gold quality of Tuscan light on Etruscan stone, the way the city announced itself against the hill before the road committed to the climb. She had been away for 11 days. She was returning. The distinction was simple, and she held it simply. Arrow was in the throne room when she arrived. This was characteristic. Arrow was often in the throne room in the late afternoon, when the day's administrative work had concluded, and the specific quality of the space, with its particular light and its particular quality of time, provided something that she had understood, in the 3rd year, was not merely habit but preference. Arrow had preferences, which was one of the things about him that the external world's account of the Volturi did not fully capture, the reduction of 3,000-year-old people to their functions rather than their particularities. He looked up when she entered. "Bella," he said, with the warmth that was the specific. Accumulated warmth of 3 years of working proximity. Not the throne room warmth of the first meeting, which had been the warmth of someone encountering a new and delightful thing. This was the warmer of 2 people who had developed a mutual and comprehensive picture of each other and whose interaction was built on that picture. "The report is filed," she said. "The archive copy and the administrative copy. I'll send the follow-up correspondence to the affected covens in the region by the end of the week." "Sit down," he said. She sat. He looked at her with the reading quality, which was the quality his attention had when he was assessing rather than cataloging, not the touch reading, which was the formal gift, but the long-term assessment that 3 years of proximity had built without requiring the gift. "The Cullen family," he said, "were cooperative," she said. "Perimeter management is assigned. No independent action. Alice Cullen's visions were the most tactically useful intelligence source we had for the primary engagement. The coordination with Dmitri worked. And the other matter," he said. She held his gaze. "Resolved," she said. "The personal components of the Forks visit," he said, with the specific, careful quality he brought to things he was asking about that he understood were not his to have asked about, but which fell within the scope of his reading of 3 years of proximity, and therefore fell within the scope of what he knew about her. "Edward Cullen. Jacob Black. Concluded," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You're not going to tell me more than that," he said. "No," she said. "All right," he said. This was the quality of their working relationship that she had found, across 3 years, to be its most valuable feature, the specific, mutual understanding of the boundary between the professional and the personal, and the discipline to maintain the boundary even when the curiosity was genuine. Aro was genuinely curious about most things, which was one of his defining characteristics. He was also disciplined about the management of his curiosity, which was a different characteristic, and one that was less represented in the external world's account of him. "The balcony," he said. "Come." The balcony was on the castle's western face. It was not a large balcony, not the theatrical architectural statement of a space designed to communicate power through scale. It was the specific, proportionate balcony of a building that had been built for function before it had been built for symbolism, and which had accumulated symbolic weight through the duration of its occupation, rather than through deliberate design. It looked down on Volterra. The afternoon light was at the specific angle that this hour in this season produced. Low, golden. The light that made stone look like something other than stone. The light that had been doing this to Volterra for longer than the English language had existed. She stood at the railing. Arrow stood beside her. Below them the city was the city, the tourists, the market, the specific movement of a living city conducting its afternoon business in the way that cities in this part of Italy had been conducting their afternoon business since the Etruscan period. Continuous, uninterrupted, indifferent to the building on the hill above it and to the people in that building in the specific. Democratic indifference of cities toward the things that oversee them. She looked at it. She had stood at the throne room floor 3 years ago and looked up at 3 thrones and the men on them, and had understood that the floor was the position available to someone who had arrived with a transaction and had not yet completed it. She had completed it in the first 10 minutes and had spent 3 years on the other side of the completion, in the position that the completion had produced. She was not on the floor now. The Seattle precedent, Arrow said. Victoria's army was the specific scale of violation that requires Volturi enforcement rather than local coven management. The Cullens understood this. Yes, she said. They made the request rather than attempting independent management, which was the correct decision. Their cooperation was productive, he said. Yes, she said. The family has been in that region for 6 years, he said. They have the specific quality of settled covens that have built functional local relationships with the human institutional infrastructure, with the Quileute pack, with the surrounding area's supernatural population. He paused. There's value in that kind of stability. Yes, she said. The Forks region is going to require ongoing monitoring, he said. The treaty line question you addressed at the boundary was a clarification, not a resolution. The jurisdictional question will recur as the pack grows and the Cullen family's tenure extends. She looked at the city. You're proposing a regional oversight role, she said. I'm noting that the region has complexity that benefits from someone who understands both the Volturi's interests in the area and the local relationships that make those interests manageable, he said. You have the local knowledge. You have the Cullen family's respect and the pack's understanding of the authority hierarchy. And you have the information network I built, she said, which covers that region better than my own, he said. She looked at the city. She thought about the highway out of Forks and the 11 minutes and the decision not to look back, which had not been the refusal of the look but the simple fact of the look not being required. When? She said. There's no urgency, he said. The Seattle situation is resolved. The region will be stable for some time. He looked at the city. It's a future consideration. All right, she said. They stood at the railing. The light was doing what it did at this hour, becoming something that was not quite the afternoon and not quite the evening, the specific quality of the transition between the two. The Tuscan light making its daily argument for its own exceptional quality. She looked at it. She thought about the throne room floor 3 years ago, the specific quality of it, the cold stone, the assembled guard, the 3 thrones, arrow descending. She had walked into that room with a transaction and had named the terms and had executed them. And the execution had produced everything that had followed, and everything that had followed had produced this. The balcony, the light, the city below, and the specific quality of standing beside someone who had read her thoughts 3 years ago and had found in them something he recognized. She had told Edward in the clearing that the door had opened into something she had walked through. This was what she had walked into. She looked at the city of Volterra below the balcony, and the city looked the way it always looked, which was like a city that had been here since before the categories she now inhabited had been invented, that had absorbed everything that had come before and would absorb everything that came after. That was going to be here tomorrow and in 100 years and in 1,000, unchanged in the specific, patient way of things that understood that duration was the only argument that mattered. She was going to be here too. Not forever in the human sense of the word, which was the sense that meant incomprehensibly long and was used as an approximation of something unthinkable. Forever in the sense that was simply true, the forward direction of her existence, which was not going to have the specific terminal quality that human existence had, the quality that made every year's light precious, because it was one of a numbered set. The light was going to be here tomorrow. She was going to be here tomorrow. The city below continued. She looked at it.